Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so finally picking up with the conclusion of Batman Damned, which has been delayed like a few months. People have been screaming at me about this. People have been telling me they've been confused with the ending of the story. And I don't blame you, right? I mean, when it comes to Brian Azzarello writing, like he's an amazing writer, right? Like there's no denying that. The problem with Brian Azzarello is sometimes what he writes doesn't make sense to anybody but himself. And it's kind of like, okay, so I had to read through this like 3 times in order to make sense out of it all. So if you felt confused and baffled at the end of the story, do not blame yourself. I felt the same way. It's just the way Azzarello writes things. Now, having said that, in the last issue, and really in the last couple issues, but really namely in the second issue, we were kind of given this indication and really even just told outright that like Batman was seemingly possessed by the Enchantress, and literally it was like we got this scene at the end of the story where like he's choking Harley Quinn to death on, you know, at the top of the Gotham police station with the Batman light, and it's like the shadow of the Enchantress, like the reflection of Enchantress in the water, who's the one doing it. So the indication seemed to be that when Batman's parents were apparently murdered, that in order to become Batman, he sold his soul to Enchantress and then went forward from there. Instead, we get this like crazy and wild twist. What ends up happening here is Batman basically wakes up in a coffin buried underground, appearing to have been buried alive. Now, of course, normally he would just kind of die here. Like he would just be left here and that would be the end of that. But he's actually saved by the most unlikely of allies, coming in the form of like tree branches and things like that are ripping a hole inside the casket and then lifting it up to the surface. He's actually rescued by Swamp Thing. Now, here's the thing. Swamp Thing is a really intriguing character in DC Comics. And the reason why is because sometimes he acts and sometimes he doesn't. The reality is that Swamp Thing, if I'm being honest with you guys, I really feel like Swamp Thing has not gotten his due. He had a story, he had a comic book run at the beginning of the New 52, but since Rebirth, he's just kind of popped up here and there. And in recent years, DC's kind of treated him like the redheaded stepchild, right? Like he's there, but they kind of turn a blind eye to him, which sort of sucks because Swamp Thing is actually a really, really interesting character in terms of the fact that he's in charge of the green, or at least part of the green, meaning he's part of like nature itself. Swamp Thing fans, I imagine, kind of have to be a little bit pissed about the treatment he's been getting in the last, maybe 2 or 3 years. He appeared in like a Batman story. He appeared in like maybe 1 or 2 other stories, but as far as I'm aware, he's not had his ongoing series since the end of his series at the beginning of the New 52. And so the way he's depicted here kind of has to be a little bit of a heartening moment for like Swamp Thing fans, because he's literally just like depicted as like this giant green monster thing. And that's kind of the nature of Swamp Thing, right? Like despite what his motivations may be, despite his basis and how he functions and what he does, he really is, by all standards of measurement, a grotesque looking creature. But it's kind of cool here because what he does is he starts to talk to Batman and say, look, this guy Constantine is not your friend. He's not here to help you. He's always got nefarious motives. And that's true, depending on the way that Constantine is written. Sometimes he really does try to do good things, but more often than not, he's kind of nefarious, right? I mean, for those of you guys who read Injustice, that's a really good example. It is an alternate reality story, but for those of you guys who read Injustice, when it came to year 3 or year 4, I think it was year 3, he basically like tricked the entirety of the superhero and supervillain community to save the little girl that was in his charge. And that was it. Like that was the only purpose he really served, was to basically like trick everyone, to use everybody to his own ends. It was cool. It was a good chance to see a lot of that mystical and dark side of magic when it came to DC. But in this instance, Swamp Thing really kind of seems to be playing more of a word of caution, right? He's not a tried and true ally insofar as like he's fighting on the side of Batman. It's really more of like, hey, a few words of warning. Do not trust this guy. This guy is not your friend. Now, of course, in the middle of all this, you end up having one of the statues, which is possessed by the Enchantress, who comes running up on Constantine, and then of course, is basically stopped by the combined efforts of Constantine, Batman, and Swamp Thing. And that's really it. Like things basically, wrap up pretty fast with this regard in terms of Enchantress kind of being chased off. But she keeps saying things like, be mine, like a fate was written and all that kind of good stuff. It's very cloak and dagger, but it all really seems to continue to hint to the idea that Batman sold his soul to her, and that's why he's in his current state. It's kind of cool to see how this whole little scenario unfolds. Something else that I want to draw your attention to, and it's something that I didn't notice the first time that I went around and read this, it wasn't until actually Mariah pointed it out, that Batman's skin is degrading. Like he's literally falling apart. Like his skin is basically, kind of breaking down, and he's essentially eroding or rotting. That'll become important later on. But again, because of the fact that Swamp Thing warns Batman, because he says, hey, look, this guy is not your friend. Constantine's basically leading you on a wild goose chase. He's not really giving you any definitive answers here. If you sit down and you look at what's going on, you need to go get some answers. And that's exactly when Batman says, enough of all this hoopla, enough of this nonsense. Like, we need some answers. Like, we need to go to a place where we can get some answers. And so what they end up doing is they end up going to the lair of Zatanna. Now, this is a cool thing, because when it comes to the magical side of DC, there are characters that always pop up, right? So like Deadman, Boston Brand, Zatanna. Now these are usually the most popular ones, the ones that have played like major roles in stories in like the last 10 to 15 years. So Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, Blackest Night, different things like that. They're kind of like the characters that everybody who knows about the magical dark side thinks of first, right? So like when you think of like DC Comics, you think of like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, that kind of thing. They're really almost the equivalent of that. Not so much in terms of power, but in terms of notoriety among like the readership in DC Comics. And so showing up to the realm of Zatanna, again, we really kind of get this intro, which is par for the course when it comes to her character being introduced into any one particular story that can be read as standalone, meaning you don't have to read anything else. It's designed to kind of be a refresher about her character. She works on magic. She says her words backwards in order to cast spells. And then she's really all just about tantalizing people and being more of like a sultry, having a sultry appearance. But in the middle of all that, you have like Boston Brand who shows up and starts some crap for a little while. Like he possesses Constantine, and then like that's basically it. Then he just kind of, and ends up being, kind of sent away by Zatanna. But it's kind of a cool thing because when the questions, when really the scenario comes in where it's like, it's time for Batman to get some questions, and he sits down with Zatanna, and the idea is you need to speak with the only person who can really give you a definitive answer to what's going on with your life right now. When this happens, we end up getting the child version of Bruce Wayne. And my first thought was, what? Like, okay, either this is not Batman or Batman is dead. Like that's the only way to really figure it out, right? I mean, it's the only way for it to make sense. They're like, it's the child version of Bruce. And it's a cool little moment because it's basically the statement like, be brave. And then like Batman gets some answers and then he leaves. And we never find out right off the bat what those answers are. At least it doesn't seem to be that way. But then he wakes up with Constantine in Crime Alley the night his parents were shot. And that's when we end up finding out Batman's been dead this entire time, that Thomas and Martha Wayne were shot, but so was Bruce. And that's why he saw that little child version of himself appearing as a ghost, because Batman's dead. And basically everything that's been going on here is his own version of hell. The Gotham City is hell. Like Batman's living through this hellish landscape. Now, the funny thing about this is that we'll see something here in a minute that will kind of seem to change that to a degree. But like when the question's asked by Constantine, what are you going to do now? Batman says, I'm going to go to the place that I should have gone the entire time. And so what he ends up doing is he ends up traveling to the morgue, only to run into the homeless man that he found at the beginning of the story back in issue number 1. And this homeless man, as we know, is the Specter. Now, of course, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this, the Specter is basically the judgment of God, right? So like those individuals who have committed crimes or committed acts that are deemed against the will of God, or at least, heinous enough, the Specter will show up and whisk you away. And the Specter's hugely powerful. It's one of those things because, with the Specter being the spirit of God's judgment, it doesn't necessarily make him all powerful, right? Like the Specter can be defeated. The Specter is a spirit, and by virtue of being a spirit, is an actual entity that exists out there and can be taken over. In any event, like Batman basically starts talking to the Specter, and the Specter says, you know what it was that you did. I am here to judge you. Like I'm here for the act that you committed. And in this hellish landscape, in this afterlife landscape that Batman's been experiencing, that in his fight with the Joker that took place just before this story started, right? So like the basis behind the story, the Joker had actually mortally wounded Batman, and Batman was going to save him. But where the Joker was hanging on for dear life, Batman's concern was, what will the Joker do when I'm gone? With me being mortally injured, basically, what's the Joker going to do? Because I'm going to die. Like, right? I mean, when Batman did not know that he was basically already dead, and in this afterlife, he believed the Joker, had essentially mortally wounded him. And if he did, and Batman died, what was the Joker going to do with Gotham City? And so instead of worrying about that, Batman let the Joker die. He let him fall to his death. And so it's one of these things where like, you never really see Batman act this way. Now, a lot of like traditional Batman fans are going to kind of be pissed about it. Like, Batman never kills anyone. I mean, he does. They're just kind of sweeping that under the rug and kind of ignoring it. But like, Batman's killed people before. And so because of that, it's one of these things where the Specter is judging Batman because Batman willingly allowed someone to die. And that's the basis behind this. If the Joker was truly incorrigible, incapable of becoming a better person, then the acts of Batman would be justified, right? Because there'd be no conceivable way for Joker to go back to being a normal human being, or at the very least, to like repent for his actions and to walk away. But as we know from the Batman and Joker mythology, the history between the two of them, the Joker does what he does because he loves the cat and mouse game with Batman. But if Batman were to die, the Joker would seemingly have no purpose. We could actually be left to believe the Joker would just end his own life in that instance, because he wouldn't see himself as having a purpose or a motivation anymore, because he lives to basically be in the conflict with Batman. And so that kind of seems to be the basis behind what the Specter's doing, is by virtue of you dying, it would have allowed the Joker to kind of move past being a villain the way he's always been, and either retreat into himself and just not bother anybody anymore, or end his own life to, in hopes that he could chase you around in the afterlife. But you never granted that possibility. You took away his ability to make that choice. You are guilty of murder, and the result is that he basically condemns Batman. But it's a funny thing because Batman sits down and says, yes, but like basically I'm already dead. You know, as you judge others, I will judge you. And so Batman's last statement is, I wish the Joker was still alive. And then basically is resigned into the morgue, essentially like back into his spirit, you know, kind of going back to where it was that he was at before, right? So like his spirit is basically left now. Now we don't know if his spirit went to actual hell, if he was in actual hell the whole time. We don't really know. We're just kind of left to believe that it's some kind of hellish purgatory-like landscape, and it's really kind of left on an ambiguous note. But then you end up having this sort of equivalent to a post-credit scene in the comic where Joker's body falling from the bridge and then dying doesn't happen. Instead, he emerges from the water as alive as he ever was. And then, you know, you get the Killing Joke kind of laughter at the Killing Joke appearance at the end of it, kind of the iconic Joker scene. And then we're left to believe he's going to go on and continue being the Joker, and Gotham's going to be worse because of it. So again, like, it's an amazing ending to a story. Like, it's so good. Like, I love Brian Azzarello's writing. So it's really, really awesome to see like this whole thing unfold and this run turn out the way that it did. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.